Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to the third part of the New Beginner's Guide to Tactics Ogre Reborn. Today we talk about magic in basically all of its forms, the kind of things that you need to know to actually thrive, and the kinds of tools that are available to you. So just like everything else, there's kind of a hard way and an easy way to go make your magic work. So a few general rules before we get started. For one thing, there are effectively going to be three types of stats that are going to be determining how well everything's performing. Intelligence is your primary offensive stat for damaging spells. Mind is going to be your primary magic accuracy stat for debuffs and things. Most of the time, your basic magic attacks won't actually be missing, but just so you're aware, this is going to primarily be used for debuffs as well as certain skills. And then additionally, resistance is going to be your primary magic resistance. The thing to note about magic in general is that it is effectively an attack form that is not necessarily very powerful, but it does get past defenses. It's barely resisted, more so than outright overpowering defenses. So like in the case of physical and ranged, as soon as they bypass defenses, that's when they get all of their big bonuses. In the case of magic, they effectively front load them in order to get past defenses, but they don't necessarily scale as high for their individual hits. More details on that in a moment, because technically they can also one-shot stuff just like everything else, but the hows and whys are a little bit different. Alright, so when it comes to your magic here, you effectively will use a weapon skill to assist in your magic penetrating past defenses. After a certain point, you really don't necessarily need to have this here, but it is effectively an option that allows you to use cheaper spells a bit more effectively for longer. The higher end spells are basically just able to hold their own and bypass defenses entirely without any assistance, so effectively this is a way to effectively play a bit more efficiently, not necessarily the only way to play, just so you know. Additionally, it doesn't matter which weapon skill you use, they will all be able to interact with your magic there, and additionally, when it comes to ones that you haven't trained yet, like for example, say you decide to equip two of them here, it effectively would use this one for the purpose of damage calculation, but it would still give this one experience for the purpose of training. So if you are looking to, for example, quickly get somebody's loyalty back up, or if you're specifically looking to just train a different weapon to get a different kind of finishers available, then that's available to you. All right, next thing, just because somebody is a traditional caster of sorts doesn't mean that that's the only thing that they can do. For example, in the case of Mr. Drumstick here, the Lich, he is still going to be getting MP from his Meditate, and sometimes maybe he doesn't want to cover things in ice completely. Maybe he wants to, I don't know, go and kill that Earth guy over there, or maybe he wants to pin something in place to stop it from getting its next turn. Or maybe he just wants to use the sheer raw power of something like Overwhelm to go, take a nice critical physical hit on something. That is still there. As you may notice, while his intelligence and mind are significantly higher, this particular class being one of the most significant examples of a unit that is he has specifically trained as magical beef jerky from the start of his life to his finish. This is about as extreme as it's realistically going to get in a normal situation, and all of his equipment is specifically only boosting those stats. So effectively, we're looking at the most extreme example here, and he still would be able to be pretty darn punishing with this start of the game Dagar over here. So, just so you know, you can kind of see finishers as just a second type of spell list that will use your physical stats instead of your magical ones, and sometimes that's exactly what you need. So, just so you know, this is absolutely a practical option, and additionally, you will have that parry effect on there. If you are simply looking for that parry effect to help defend your casters a little bit better, just know that the Sticker +1 is the second lightest weight option full stop, as far as something that you can equip in this slot. Technically speaking, there are other weapons, namely the cursed weapons that you can acquire in Chapter 4, that have no weight whatsoever, but in this particular case, we're not going to bother with that. Technically, the best parrying offhand weapon in the game is going to be the Cursed Dagger, which most classes are able to equip, and would effectively give you parry 2 at a weight of 0. But again, this is like a really minor min-max you don't need to worry about for now. Defensively speaking, before we go into the more magical stuff, just so you're aware, as I mentioned in the first one, pay attention to stuff like this. You can equip a Basin of Time, for example, to make yourself very resistant and less appealing to archers if they're still firing at you. You can equip a Filter of Ashes, aka a Smoke Bomb, to be able to guarantee at least 20% dodge odds versus them, and if they're still being a pain in your neck, hopefully not very literally, you can put on a Horn of the Savage to vastly reduce their accuracy. So Horn of the Savage is going to affect the accuracy of everything on the field except for magic. However, in a weird little twist, it kind of depends whose accuracy is going down. Like, melee isn't as effective as ranged as far as I can tell, because the weather is just kind of it does whatever it wants kind of mechanic. But either way, stacking those three, you basically are going to have no threat from archers if that's the thing that you're running into. Okay, back to the magic stuff itself. So, just so you know, damage isn't the only thing that your casters need to be doing. You effectively have three different types of kind of categories for your magic there. You've got your direct magic stuff, so you've got those in the form of missiles and overheads and essentially magical machine guns, as well as gigantic explosions, and instills are kind of a support ability. So anyways, you have a few different direct damage options that are available to you. But just so you know, essentially these are going to be spending a lot of MP for the purpose of doing damage right now. You also have access to a lot of debuff abilities that are effectively going to be for kind of controlling the fight in different ways. So you have stuff like Slow for obviously slowing stuff down, Petroburst for making things unable to fly, and other things that would occur from turning somebody into a stone. So if you wanted to throw somebody off a cliff and they were annoyingly flying around, there you go. If you wanted to put somebody to sleep, that's here. Poison's here. Paralytic Wave is here, and Charm is here. Generally speaking, Poison Cloud is going to be one of the most insidious abilities in the entire game. I specifically will mention this one because as far as kind of damage in general goes, it doesn't really get more efficient than this. Against heavy units in the end game, you're potentially seeing, potentially like upwards of like 800 to 1200 damage, depending on how slow they are, from poison per turn. So this will scale over time. 10% is 10%. Anything that's got a bigger health bar, just poison it. You're going to have an easier time. Anything that's got a shielding ability of any kind, whether it's a Phalanx, a Dragon Scale, if you have Sword Masters that are bringing out their preempt, you know what? Poison's still going to poison. It doesn't really care. Additionally, as I mentioned before, Spell Strike. So this is something that all casters can use by default. This will guarantee at least 30% hit odds, and will make your debuffs a completely viable thing from start to finish. Even 30% as a minimum chance is going to be perfectly fine from the start of the game to the end of the game. And additionally, it's worth noting that just because somebody has stuff on their spell slots doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only spells they get. There are certain items that will also give you additional things that you can do as far as your spells go. Like, for example, the Caldia over here is an item you'll find fairly early on that will give you one free cast of Charm, which gets me to MP conservation. So relying on Meditate isn't always going to be the ideal solution here. So Meditate will give you a certain amount of MP per turn, but it's not going to be a perfect kind of end-all solution, all of that stuff, because eventually you may run out, especially if you're running more expensive spells. So let's talk about management real quick. So you're going to have these items that are going to give you these free spell slots. These are great for taking a quick break, or if you want to use your items to do something instead, this just allows you to take a turn to rest up. You don't always need to be casting. Additionally, cheap spells like, for example, Poison Cloud and Paralytic Wave are going to be very reliable ways to just kind of take a sort of rest turn to generate more MP. Past about Chapter 2, your Meditate will be able to generate more than those actually cost, so that's a very effective way of doing it. Additionally, remember you do have your Throwing Stone that you can go throw at a prop, get a skill card, and make this 30% more likely to roll, aka it's now going to roll 70% of the time. That's going to be more than enough. Additionally, when we were talking about items, many will over-focus on the MP restoral items and get frustrated because they think it's the only way to get MP back, because they think that that's the way to do it, because, traditional RPG type stuff and whatever. So allow me to introduce you to the Fruit of the Adept. This is going to be an item that will scale up over the course of the game. This is going to cost you only $70 to make. You can make them as soon as crafting is unlocked, and they are going to be essentially a renewable source of getting your MP back if it's really what you need. These are, again, useful for basically everybody. They are a 10% heal as well as a 10% MP restoral. Now, this essentially means that this actually can pair up with another ability, such as Insight over here, to give you a bit more. Like by default, he would be getting 32 MP from using that item, but if he were to use this, he would get 38. Obviously, this will be worth different things over the course of the game, but just so you know, every little bit helps, every point helps, so that is something that's worth considering. But if you are looking for a simple bump in MP at the very start of the match, go for a Fruit of the Adept. They are ridiculously cheap, and one of those things that you should keep a pretty much unlimited stock of. Alright. Next up, again, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to only be focusing on damage. Debuff casters are absolutely a viable thing. So, for example, this guy right over here, going for Poison Charm, and you will have actually support abilities as well. I never did get into those, did I? So you've got a lot of support abilities that will be good for different things, like Spell Charge will be able to throw your MP to somebody else, or Paradigm Shift will be able to reset the turns of up to 5 people at once, with a locked-in 60% success rate. Which actually gets me to one more little thing to point out here. Certain spells will check for Mind and check versus the enemy's evasion, however it's relevant. Sometimes it checks for a combination of like Mind and level, sometimes it checks for a combination of just evasion and Mind and all of that. Just generally speaking, if you're using concentration, you're fine. You're as min-maxed as you need to be as far as any debuff goes. That's a weird sound jank going on in the background. I apologize. Not why it's doing that. Anyway, in certain cases, though, there will be certain abilities that will essentially bypass this. So, effectively, things like Howl or the Lament of the Dead on the Terenius are going to be abilities that will essentially say, okay, I don't really care, what the enemy's resistances are. This is just, like, 60% to 80% chance to just hit no matter what. So many of these will effectively just be a locked-in percentage. These are usually going to be the ones that are on the auto skills, just so you're aware. So basically, regardless of resistances, unless the person is completely immune, they will always have that 60 to 80% chance based on rank. I believe that's what the numbers were settled on at this point, somewhere along those lines. So like 60% at rank 1, 80% at maximum rank. And the skill cards will actually increase the chances for these to go off, not their hit percentage. Just so you're aware. Just to kind of, point out that they're different from these spells over here. Alright, next up, let's go ahead and take a quick little peek over at recovery magic. So, you might have potentially seen your healers and thought, wow, this heal isn't scaling up. I must replace this with items so that everybody has a full bar all the time. Common misconception. So, when it comes to healers in Reborn, and technically the PSP version as well, they're more of a heal over time type of situation. So you may notice that the general cost and recovery time of these is fairly low, and oftentimes when you go and compare their actual kind of speed overall as you're going through fights, you'll notice that these guys tend to take fairly quick actions. They don't tend to move very far, and ideally you want to keep them within range of your entire team, so that they're not moving around very much. Ideally, what you want to be doing is essentially just throwing around these heals again in as quick succession as possible. This means that you don't necessarily need to upgrade your heal as time goes on. This is actually a bit of a thing that's going to be relevant to the other spells as well. But using cheaper spells more quickly or more effectively is going to be just as good as, quote-unquote directly upgrading them. Because as we take a look at these different heals here, like we have our 1, 2, and 3, like the 3 is literally just 3 heals stacked on top of each other, getting slightly less efficient every time they do that. You're not always going to have 45 MP to cast, but you will typically have 15 to 30, meaning that this is going to more readily be available. By the way, I apologize if you hear a dog barking in the background. Unfortunately, it looks like the neighbors let their dog out, and it's barky time. Anyhow, so just bear that in mind, that you're not going to go and directly upgrade these. Like, many times you'll see people doing stuff like this, where it's like, oh shoot, I gotta have the ultimate power at all times, and everything on their list is like 70 to 80 MP to cast, and it's just unrealistic, and then you see expectations of like, oh, I'm just gonna spend the entire map chewing on my MP stick over here, getting my 100 MP, to then go cast my spell one time, and then immediately go back to chewing on that MP stick. It's frankly slow and kind of nutty to do it that way, but again, in many cases that's what folks ended up settling on when the game first released. So this is very expensive to keep running. However, something like this guy over here, where he's effectively using, well, in his case he's a Lich. Liches are the exception to this. There's actually 2 classes that basically have unlimited MP. Liches are able to go and eat, well, Liches and Necromancers, I guess, are able to fire essentially a magic missile that will eat the health of an enemy unit and convert it to MP for themselves. This, especially if it happens to crit, will more or less keep them funded for the entire fight. However, On top of this, you also will want to have more efficient options. Like let's say this matriarch over here, just to show you more options that you can do with your different caster types. Just so you know, every caster type has a role somewhere. So whatever caster you're looking for, there'll definitely be something for you. But in this particular case, she was essentially made to be more of a tanky one. So like the matriarch and patriarch are more of a tanky version where they can effectively evade 3 physical attacks per turn, but at the same time, she's essentially looking to get in close, make use of these dagger finishers, and going to attempt to use her Thunderbird summons over here to just kind of rush stuff down. She's here to tank hits and try to take opportunist hits wherever she can, slow stuff down, petrify other stuff. Essentially, again, just performing a sort of light tank role. Whereas something like the Cyclops over here is also technically a caster and would be passing out free stuns left, right, and center, as well as hobbles. Or, for example, we have a different warlock over here that would keep options around for keeping something like spellbooks on hand. Where in his case, the option to leaden an oncoming griffin might be pretty useful for him. That's why he's an earth element. He baits in an air element griffin, hopefully lands this leaden, and then walks away, ideally behind a rampant aura from a knight or something, with this now grounded flying unit. But again, these don't even have to be dedicated casters. For example, we have something like Divold over here, right? So in the case of Mr. Divold here, he is essentially a entirely debuff caster, looking to use this concentration skill that the casters had, as well as a Lament of the Dead, to increase the abilities of what the Terror Knight has access to. So they get Sleep, they get Paralytic Wave, they get Drain Heart, as well as he can use this spell slot on this shield to get a free Poison Cloud. Now, the reason that this is relevant is because Drain Heart is a good example of something you'll see very commonly in the design here, where effectively you have one spell that you'd think is going to get an upgraded version and seems weak right from the get-go, but can be twisted into something entirely different. So, for example, in his case, what he's doing is he's looking to set up situations where, like, let's say in a normal situation, I would have him running a cudgel, right? So he goes for a mace. Normally, he ends up just bonking something for that stun effect, looking to inflict either a fear or stun with that stick, right? So the thing is ideally hit by fear to some description. He then walks away, ideally behind keeping a rampart aura between him and the other guy, and then uses this Drain Heart combined with the fear as well as the cudgel finisher over here to have an enfeeble. So in an ideal world, the thing winds up stunned, enfeebled, and hit with fear. And then would then combine in something like this pressure whirl here, which has that effect, which then allows this thing to potentially crit up to the point of maybe healing him up for 1,000 or so. Essentially, he's looking to hit really hard by stacking all of these bonuses. So this basic spell that wouldn't do very much more than like 1 or 200 on its own might potentially go up to several hundreds or maybe over 1,000 if it ends up landing. If he ends up finding the right cards and finds the right situation to make it land, you know. So just know to keep your eyes open for these little opportunities. Everything can be twisted in some way. Like this is what I mentioned earlier about casters technically can scale up, where they have something like these tier 2 summons. It's like a magical machine gun. They're going to fire lots of technically low damage attacks, but if each one of those has their damage boosted by a magic up card, if they have some critical boosts, and then, for example, the Valkyrie and Shaman have something like Nature's Touch, which for anything classed as elemental would cause them to give them a 50% damage bonus. And then they combine this with their ability to cast for free. And then effectively they just have this fairly overpowered magical machine gun that they're doing, even though they were technically supposed to be a melee class. So you can twist anything in this pile to something useful for you, whether it's a magical sniper like this one, whether it's somebody that's kind of doubling as a support exorcist over here with this one, or for example this guy who isn't even a caster whatsoever, he just happens to have that same really strong ability on his fist over here, so he's looking specifically for cards to go and use that one ability one really strong time, being a frontline fighter all of the rest of the time. So keep your eyes open for these little opportunities. There's a lot of little ways that you can twist this stuff in your favor. There's a lot of ways that you can move things around to do something tricky. There is no right way to do it, okay? The only kind of quote-unquote right things to bear in mind are that if you're looking to hit with debuffs, you're going to want to have mind and or concentration on there. Certain units like the familiar over here will generally have preposterously high mind anyway, so you're fine not doing that for them. Like if their mind score is high enough, you just simply don't need it. Finishers can be seen as a second form of spells, like this guy over here is going for blowguns, bows, meditate to fund all of this stuff, as well as just a extra physical ability over here in case he needs it. I didn't actually touch on these in stills. These are a bit of an interesting thing that everybody gets access to. This is going to be just an overall elemental buff to that unit, giving you a boost to your physical attacks, as well as giving you a shield versus that element. For most people, I would recommend saying, like, let's say if you have an air unit, equip an ice shield because it will defend you against ice. Or, if you're a fire unit, equip a water shield. Or, if you are, for example, running an archer, just know that these elements can actually interact with each other in interesting ways. So, for example, say you have Canopus. He has a skill that lets him put an air buff on anybody nearby him. If that unit happened to be air and the target that they were firing on was earth, then instead of the normal like 25% or so this is adding to this attack, it would say, okay, the buff is air, the unit firing is air, the target is earth, maximum efficiency time, it ends up going to like 31%. It's not massive, but it is technically something that interacts and just kind of fun to know about. Okay. Everything else should be relatively self-explanatory. As before, these resurrection abilities will work just as well as the standard blessing stones. In fact, they are better, and again, will give somebody an instant turn. As far as other magic that you'll get access to down the road, obviously your basic elemental stuff is going to be basic elemental stuff for a reason. Most things will stick to these bread and butter moves. They will get some stronger moves down the road, but again, I would recommend tiering out how you pace their kind of magic options here. So try to keep in mind how much MP somebody is generating and build accordingly. Typically, I would recommend 2 cheap debuffs, as well as a couple damaging moves that you prefer in whatever style you prefer. For some units, like for example this Cyclops over here, there's somebody that's going to be essentially taking physical hits instead of using Meditate, because they're getting hit a lot, they're punching back a lot, it's generating MP for them, but not very much. So he would use something like this Black Lizard Powder to give himself Spell Strike, he would put this Poison Cloud on there to get some of those numbers going over time, Firestorm, just in case he wants to break some props and it kind of looks cool, and then ideally most of the time he's actually going for Spell Charge and Drain Heart. He's trying to find criticals, he's trying to support the team, because he's in the front, he's putting out these stuns everywhere, he might be able to use this to leaden something and keep it from flying, but at the same time he's essentially he's looking to support his team. So let's say there's somebody that's got a potentially the option for a finisher, or maybe wants to double up on a finisher, he can take that MP he's generated and throw it back at somebody else with a spell charge. Or if he picked up a matchup and a crit, maybe a Drain Heart would be useful for him. But once again, Fruit of the Adept. He's got a lot of health, he's got a decent amount of MP. Perhaps we'd replace his dash skill over here with an Insight, so that he's effectively able to use this as a 30 MP renewable item instead, to buff up at the start of fight, or heal himself and get himself some MP at the same time. Again, tailor this stuff as you will. Everything has a potential purpose, so just again keep your mind open. Forget the whole traditional roles thing. Everybody can be tailored out in a lot of different ways. Whether it's switching out the exorcism ability on a cleric to go use that ability off their staff instead, which actually, oh shoot, I forgot to mention one very important detail that I keep forgetting when trying to make these. The staff spell range bonus, it only works in your main hand. So offhanding your staff, no real point for that. Always main hand your staff. And yeah, that should be about it then. So, y'all have yourselves a good one. Remember to keep your options open. Keep your mind open. There's a lot of different casters. They've all got something going for them, whether it's the basic wizards being able to be your speed casters, whether it's your shamans min-maxing for long-range artillery, or your clerics actually being surprisingly good damage with their finishers. Like, honestly, don't sleep on clerics wielding Caldias. Like, this shit can be devastating, just so you know. I would say this doesn't hold up as well in the post game, which is where this file's at right now. But yeah, Chaldia clerics are actually kind of a powerhouse, so keep that in mind. So yeah, there's a lot of different wizard options out there. There's a lot of different things that can be twisted. So keep your eyes open. All right. Hopefully that helps. Y'all have yourselves a good one, and I'll see you in the next one.